Our next guest is a journalist, critic, and essayist. She currently serves as the local music columnist for the Chicago Tribune and contributes regularly to Vice Magazine, The Guardian, Pitchfork, and MTV News, where she is interested in writing about the intersection of race, gender, pop culture, and sexuality. In 2014, BuzzFeed named her one of the 21 amazing role models for 20-somethings, fulfilling her dream of being on some form of a under 30 list before turning 30. She currently hosts The Back Talk, an award-winning podcast featuring original stories from young women of color. Talk to her after this show if you are interested in, if you are also obsessed with Jane the Virgin. Welcome back to Tuesday Funk, Britt Julious. Good height, a little higher, good.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. They promised me a meal, but instead I got a box of donuts. It was fitting that I would take a car to get to my final destination. And where was I going? To a round table for users who have taken more than the usual amount of rides using Lyft, a ride-sharing service that took me to and from different destinations in Chicago. Congratulations on being one of our most prominent and highest-ranked users, the email said. They told me the CEO of Lyft would be in town next week and would like to meet with me and a couple of other users to talk about my experiences. You'll get lunch, they said. It had been a while since I had taken off from work, and so I spent the morning in a nondescript building on Michigan Avenue, talking about my experiences riding in a car owned by someone I do not know. The Lyft sign was taped to a glass door of an anonymous office, and I sat in a room of mostly prickly businessmen complaining about the influx of, their words, non-American drivers now on the app. How did I get here? 2 years ago, the idea of taking a car from a stranger seemed improbable. Also stupid. How many times had I taken cabs and had less than wonderful experiences? I'm thinking about that time I took a cab home at 3 a.m. to my parents' house in Oak Park when I was unable to afford an apartment of my own. If I went out in the city and got reckless and just did really terrible, eager things to make myself feel excited and young, I usually stayed with my sister or with a friend who lived in the city. But that night I wanted to go home and be in my own bed, to not have to wake up to back pain and a long train ride back to the suburbs. And so I took a cab and we went down the expressway. Wouldn't it be funny, the cab driver began, if I just locked you in this car? He laughed for a full minute. I said nothing, just looked down at my phone. The cell battery was dead. Excuse me? I finally asked. I mean, if I wanted to, I could lock this car and do whatever I wanted to with you, he said. I began to grab the door handle, but it was locked, and of course we were racing down the expressway at night. Where could I go? Outside my dirty window, I saw the still present destruction of the West Side I knew as home growing up. Decrepit buildings passed by in a flash. Everything looked the same. It was the first time I felt that way. A few years later, I would take another ride home to my old apartment in the Ukrainian Village neighborhood in the city, and the driver would question my identity. He would ask, how could I be from there? That part of the city we forget exists, meaning the Austin neighborhood, of course. I would say some things never leave you, not ever, no matter how much we try, and so even though my voice sounds white and suburban and girly, I could never really truly be away from that place. Some things stay and linger and grow improbably when and where you least expect them to do so. But that is another story, I think. Home is not about getting there, at least not in this particular story. In that second cab, I thought, here is where my night ends. What the fuck are you talking about? I asked him. Oh, calm down, he said. I'm just joking. But like always, I seemed to miss the joke. There was that other time when another cab driver ignored my instructions. We missed my exit from the expressway, and the next was closed, and the next one too. Construction obstructed the exits out here, away from the city. The difference between one exit and the next is a town or two, really. The farther away from the city, the more the towns look the same and felt the same, and even though they are not, when you are in them, it feels daunting and terrible. We rode and rode past my home and past the exits, and instead drove toward an abandoned factory in the western suburbs. He locked his doors and he told me to stop crying. He said, "This is all my fault because I kept telling him what to do. This is his job," he said. "You women always think you know everything." He didn't do anything. I eventually made my way back to my parents' home. "It was just a misunderstanding," he said later. "And I suppose that's true, but I wonder if he could see and hear and understand the repercussions of me nearly kicking through the back window in panic. Did he feel my punches towards the back of his seat? Did the sting of my slap against the side of his face mean anything? Did he feel bad at all as I walked blocks and blocks and blocks toward my home address, alone and cold in the pitch black of night? I just got a little lost," he told me, 5 miles past my parents' home. I lied to him that night, and so when I walked and walked and walked home, it was because I had said, "Here's my place," and got out in a town I didn't know, although I lived in the West Side for more than 10 years. It was another 10 minutes before I made it back to my parents' home. A lie, I think, is what you make of it, and I never told my parents that story. The back of the round table, in this tiny room with 10 businessmen, an elderly woman who could no longer get around herself, and so she instead took Lyft to go to the places she wanted to. There was me, a relatively healthy, physically strong young woman. I began to listen to their stories. Now, you see, I used to only use Lyft, one guy began, but now I use a mix of Lyft and Uber because, sometimes those Lyft drivers, they're just not as clean or as nice of cars as Uber drivers. And, if I'm trying to, show a sweet, sexy thing a good time, and hopefully get her to come back to my place, and, I want to make sure that we are, not in a Nissan or a Hyundai or whatever that guy has. No, I want to make sure that we are riding in the best kind of car. You know what I mean? "Yeah," another guy said. "With Lyft, it's like a crapshoot. It could be a really nice Mercedes, or it could just be some junk." "So you're concerned that you can no longer take women out on dates?" the CEO of Lyft asked. "Yeah, that's my biggest concern. Women are particular." A year before, and to that exact day, I rode the Blue Line back to the west side of Chicago. That is where my hairstylist still works 15 years after I first went to her. That weekend, I would be attending a wedding of a college friend who I no longer really spoke to, but because I love weddings more than most things in the world, I really wanted to be there. Women are particular. I kept thinking about what he said. Are women particular, or are women just real? Are women particular, or do we just live in reality? Are women particular, or are women just logical? Are women particular, or are women just learned? A year before, and to the day, I took the Blue Line home, and a man assaulted me. We were alone on the train. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. The sun was shining, and the sky was blue. It was the first real day of summer after a long, torturous, depressing winter. It was beginning, and the end, and then the beginning again. He held me down. He waited. He looked me in the eye. He said nothing. It could have been worse. I've heard of worse. I've experienced worse. But most people don't want to be in that sort of position and say, yes, we were alone on a train and my clothes were ripped, and I left that train with his semen on my legs. I chased him through the train. I took his photo. I cried. I asked for help. Walking back and forth through the train, I took up space. This was new to me. I grabbed any and everything I could find, the seats, the poles, the windows. As a woman, as a particular woman, I am so used to conforming my body to not taking up space, to not being there. But on this train after this incident, I wanted to feel and touch and be present in everything that was there. The public tricks behaviors turns us into the same kind of people. I'm a woman, and because I'm a woman, I try to not take up space. I try to get from start to finish as quickly as possible. I'm always going. There is no room to pause. And on that day, I was pushed into the smallest corner possible. But my reaction was to take up space. A week later, I began using Lyft more frequently. Uber too, but Lyft was my favorite. There were more women drivers on Lyft, making me feel comforted. It reminded me of being with my mother or my two neighbors who live on the floors below me, older women in their 40s and 50s. They protect me. They ask questions of the men, my boyfriends who had stopped by my apartment. They text me to see if I've gotten home at night. They bring me cookies. It's just a good feeling. I used Lyft to go to work and to go out at night, and especially I used it to go home to the west side I had always known, but also the home that I had struggled to get to in the past again and again, riding in cars of people I did not know, riding in trains and riding in cabs and riding all over to get back to the home I had really could only call my own. These trips by car at night might not have been the best, but they were better than the alternative I knew. You cannot ever really truly erase the past. Women are particular, he said in that room, and the part of me, a younger part of me, a stronger part of me, wanted to refute his statements. Your generalizations are weak, sir. Your beliefs are based on assumptions, sir. You seek a particular lifestyle, sir. But, perhaps these women are not turned off by the cars and are instead turned off by you. You're not that cute, you're not that exciting. But instead, I nodded my head and said, yeah, women are particular. It's true, we have to be. At the end of the round table, after asking about cleanliness and talking about timeliness and asking about frustrations and talking about joys, they said we were free to go. Here's a code for 2 free rides, an assistant to the CEO said. It's for current users, so it's active and it works. Use it on a night out, another Lyft employee said, looking at me. Use it to take your girl out in the town, another said to the businessman from earlier. Use it however you want. But how would I use mine? Like I've always done, to keep me alive. Thank you.